Chapter 4a/n. I would like to thank everyone that added this story to their favorites and follows, as well as everyone that reviewed the last chapter. Walking through the gates, Naruto couldn't help but stare blankly at the large building in front of her while the kids around her were laughing and knocking each other's shoulder. She shook her head and then stared at the map given to them by the school. From what she could recall, the school had decided to place her in Class 1A, which was on the first floor of the main building. "You're that cool girl that took me to the nurse." The blonde-haired girl stuffed the piece of paper into her pocket before twisting her head to see an orange-haired girl jogging towards her. There was a large smile plastered on the girl's face as she placed her hands on her chest, taking deep breaths before looking up at her. The joy in the girl's eyes told her that she was truly happy to see her, even though the two of them had never really interacted with each other. "And you are the girl that asked me why I went that far to take care you to the nurse." The girl flushed pink, but the smile on her face didn't fade one bit. "If you excuse me, I need to get going to my class. It won't look if I'm late for class on the first day of school. I never got to thank you for taking me to the nurse." Naruto stopped walking and turned her head to look at the girl, who looked down at her hands before looking back at her. She should turn her body back around and make her way to class, but a part of her wanted to hear what the girl had to say to her. No one had called her cool before, and very few people told her the words "thank you." This girl, right in front of her, would be the third person to thank her. "Why do you want to thank me? No one seemed to have noticed that I was injured, but you did." The blonde-haired girl slowly nodded her head and the orange-haired girl smiled. "I thought that everyone was too focused on the exam to notice that I was in pain, which was why I tried to pull my leg away from the rubble. Recovery girl scolded me for doing that. She said that I made my leg worse and that if you didn't take me to her then my leg would have been crushed from the pressure. Even though I tried to encourage you to do the exam first, you were more concerned of taking care of me, and I can't help but thank you for that." She stared blankly at the smiling girl and then to the smiling students surrounding them. 3 years ago, Naruto would have said that it wasn't a problem with a smile on her face. Her past self would then gloat about it to her teammates, telling them that this was proof that she was awesome. Her current self had no idea what to say to the girl because while it wasn't a problem, she didn't know how to talk with so much sincerity. Naruto couldn't even force herself to smile at the girl. "A hero should put the well-being of others before themselves," Naruto finally answered. "I couldn't leave you there because not only would it be a shitty thing for me to do, but also because that isn't what a hero is supposed to do. Heroes need to rescue as many people as they can, and you needed rescuing." The green-eyed girl stared at her for a good couple of seconds before smiling brightly at her. "My name is Kendo Itsuka, but you can call me Itsuka-chan. What's your name?" The blue-eyed girl flickered her eyes from the girl's smiling face to the sky in front of her. This girl barely knew her, but she was already giving her the privilege of calling her by her first name, while her teammate in Konoha always got irritated when she called her Sakura-chan. She used to yell at her for acting like that the two of them were close to each other, even going far as to tell her that they weren't friends. She doesn't know what to feel. "Uzumaki Naruto, but you can call me Naruto-chan," Naruto finally said, looking away from the girl. The girl tilted her head. "Uzumaki Naruto? That's an awesome name, but I think I'm going to call you Naru-chan." Naruto swirled her head to look at the girl, who still had a large smile on her face. There was no coldness or taunting in her eyes, there was only awe in her eyes. Did the girl think her name was cool? Wasn't she going to comment about how boyish her name sounded? Most girls would tell her about how her name was so ugly. No one talked about how cool her name was. No one seemed to think just how nice her name was. "And Naru-chan?" The girl nodded her head. "Naruto is a great name, but Naru-chan is the nickname for the sweet girl that rescued me from the rubble. I hope you don't mind that I'm being straightforward about it, but I want us to be the closest of friends. I actually tried to ask the school about you, but they refused to give me your details, saying that it is a breach of privacy." Naruto tuned the girl out as she continued to prattle on about how difficult it was to find her and how she hoped that she passed the exam. Friends. This girl barely knew her and she wanted to be friends with her. Did she even know how to be friends with someone? Could she allow herself to let people in again? She had been hurt by the people that she thought were her friends. She had been betrayed by the one person that she thought would never betray her. Yet Naruto also knew that she couldn't live her life if she continued with her thoughts. Half of the seats were taken by the time Naruto entered her new classroom. Rubbing the back of her neck, the blonde-haired girl scanned the classroom to find the perfect place for her to sit. There were around 5 empty seats, with each seat being from one of the 5 rows. There was an empty seat between a black-haired girl and a boy with becolored hair, while there was a seat behind a boy that had hair, which reminded her of Gapes. She didn't want to sit in the front row since she hated having attention drawn towards her. Isn't it awesome, Naruto? We're in the same class. Naruto blinked her eyes when a red-haired boy called out to her. She titled her head and knitted her eyebrows together as she tried to remember who the boy was. There was no doubt that he looked familiar to her, but she didn't know why he looked so familiar with her. Was it his hair? No, she would recall if she met a red-haired boy. The boy frowned at her and the blonde couldn't help but notice that there was a small scar above his right eye. You're Kirishima, aren't you? The boy grinned and nodded his head. Did you dye your hair? Kirishima nodded. I wanted to reinvent myself before school started, so I thought dyeing my hair red was a great way to do it. The blonde-haired girl furrowed her eyebrow at her new classmate's words. Reinvent himself? Why would he want to reinvent himself? It wasn't like he had a shitty personality and decided to have a change of heart. He was a very nice person from what she could tell from her limited interaction with him. There was no need for him to reinvent himself, but staring at the boy's cheerful eyes, she couldn't bring herself to tell him those words. It looks good on you, Naruto finally said as she made her way to the seat between the becolored boy and black-haired girl. The red-haired boy blinked before smiling widely at her, but the blonde-haired girl couldn't bring herself to smile back at him. There was just so much emptiness inside of her that she didn't know if her lips could still tilt upwards like before. She shook her head and pulled a book from her bag. Perhaps she was a sadist, but when Naruto saw that the book was written by that perverted Sunin, she couldn't stop herself from buying the book. Maybe it was the fact that a part of her regret the way she talked to him, or maybe it was because she missed seeing that perverted man, but she wanted to read his book. The book, whose character had the same first name as her. The book, whose main character reminded her of the perverted man that took the time to teach her the Raise Non, which was the most powerful jutsu in her arsenal. Please remove your feet from that desk. Naruto looked away from the book cover and watched with blank eyes as her new classmate yelled at Bakugo, who had his legs on the chair. Do you realize your actions is insulting to every student who had come to you before us? Do you not care about how you are insulting the people who made this desk? Naruto took a deep breath, put the book on the table before marching towards the 2 arguing boys. It wasn't any of her business that Bakugo was being an ass. She shouldn't give a shit about the fact that the 2 of them were going to fight on the first day of school. It wasn't like it was going to affect anyone if those 2 yell at each other. She repeated those words to herself as the 2 boys continued to argue. It seemed like some habits were hard for her to kill. The first day of school had barely started and you are already insulting people. Bakugo twisted his head and glared at her, but the blonde-haired girl held her ground. I know you have a brain there, so use that head of yours, and think carefully at how this would look like to the teacher and how this would label you. If you keep your feet on the table, then the teacher would label you a delinquent. You think I give a shit, Whiskers? Do you even have a clue on how people perceive you? Naruto folded her arms against her chest. If you keep acting like a shitty person, then people are always going to think that you are a villain. It is one thing to have the strength, but it is a whole different story when you have the personality of an ass. The blonde-haired boy stared at her for a good couple of seconds, before glaring at her. Did he honestly think people were going to be happy to see him when he rescued them? Did he really think it is okay to act like a delinquent to everyone? She used to smile whenever Sasuke's brother came to visit the school, because of just how polite he was to everyone. Unlike the other shinobi, Itachi had always been kind to her. He used to look at her with some degree of warmness while everyone just gave her that cold look. It was just sad that the one person, who appeared to be kind, was also the same person that damaged her teammate. Are you done scolding him? Naruto frowned and twisted her body around to find a tired-looking man standing behind her with an unamused look. I hope you realize that this is the hero course and not some place where you can act like his mother. The blonde flushed red before making her way to her seat. Was she really acting like Bakugo's mother? Naruto couldn't help but ask herself as she sunk down into her seat. She couldn't just ignore the fact that the asshole was going to start a fight with someone, or that he was acting in a way that made everyone think he was a bad person. Even though he was an asshole, she wanted him to at least pretend to be a great guy to everyone. It took all of you 10 seconds to quiet down, the man stated as he placed a sleeping bag beside the floor. 10 seconds that was wasted because none of you know just how precious time could be. Naruto slipped her hands into pocket and glanced at her classmates. Most of them were gawking at this teacher while only Izuku seemed to be looking at the guy with a frown. Did her classmate know the guy? Was he a famous hero? Because he didn't really look all that flashy if you asked her. Most of the heroes that she saw on television or even visited the cafe were flashy. This guy looked like he barely got out of the bed. I'm your homeroom teacher, the man said as if none of them had realized this. My name is Aizawa Shota and I'm pleased to meet you. He might be pleased to meet them but Naruto wasn't sure if she was pleased to meet him. The blonde-haired girl could only frown as she stared at the baseball pit in front of them. What was their teacher planning for them to do? Why did he tell them to go change their clothes? Most schools would start with talking about what they expected or give them the timetable. There hadn't even been ushered into the main hall for some opening speech from the principal or even some fancy ceremony. It seemed so odd if you asked her. I brought all of you here so that I can evaluate your quirks, Aizawa informed them. Most of the students around her gawked at his words before glancing at each other as if to confirm if what he said was true. Naruto could only stare at the man's back, not bothering to interact with the other kids. Did it surprise her? Yes, but it really wasn't a big deal for her. Her quirk was her chakra since there was little to no one who had her abilities. Out of most people, her chakra was considered to be a very strong quirk. What do you mean an evaluation? Aren't we going to go to the entrance ceremony? Aren't we going to talk about the guidance sessions? One girl protested. If you want to become heroes then consider those things a waste of your time. He twisted his whole body around and gave them a serious look. When people say that U.High is known for having a freestyle educational system, they are not just talking about the students. The words freestyle educational system also applies to us teachers as well. Her classmates paled at his words while Naruto frowned at his words. There was something about those words that made her feel uneasy about what he planned for them to do during their evaluation. Perhaps it was silly of her but she could distinctly remember Kakashi-sensei and how he told them about the second genin exam. He had threatened to expel them from the program, pitted them against each other before allowing them to pass. At the time, she had been happy to pass the genin exams but Naruto wondered if he made a good call when it came to them. He allowed 3 kids to pass even though the 3 of them couldn't work together. He must have known that their personalities didn't suit each other but he let them pass. From what she saw in this part of the world, he should have let them fail and send Sasuke to therapy. In middle school, all of you had played the games, softball, long jump, the 50-meter race, endurance running, grip strength, side-to-side stepping, upper body training and the seated toe touch. Those were all the gym tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. Aizawa picked up the baseball. Now this country still insists that we need to prohibit quirks when we are calculating the averages of those records. If we were to think about it carefully then we will see that it isn't rational. If a person was to look at it, the Department of Education is just procrastinating. Naruto stiffened when the teacher flickered his eyes at her. Did he know the truth? Had they found out where she was? He promised her that he wouldn't tell anyone where she was going. Did he break that promise to her? No, he couldn't have broken his promise. He couldn't even convince her to stay in Konoha, so how could he tell anyone? It was just her paranoia. Uzumaki, Aizawa said, snapping her out of her train of thought. How far could you throw in middle school? 150 meters, Naruto rubbed the back of her neck when most of her classmates gawked at her. Bakugo and Izuku grimaced at her words. No doubt they remembered how the baseball coach kept pushing her to join his girls' team. He used to come to the class and order her to join the team, telling her that she needed to take up a hobby. He just wanted her to join the team because he wanted to win, not because he actually cared about her. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa ordered, throwing the ball at her. I don't care what you do but don't ever leave the circle. I want you to give it all that you have got. Nodding, Naruto stared at the ball and then to the field in front of her. Everything that she got? She bit her lips and closed her eyes. It had been a long time since she focused her chakra to the point of her fingers. Had she even done it before? It might be a little bit risky for her since her chakra control was nothing to brag about, but there was no harm on her doing it. Taking a deep breath, Naruto shifted her body and channeled her chakra into her arms before swinging the ball out into the air. This was the best that she could do with the control that she had. Until just a couple of months ago, she hadn't considered controlling her chakra since she never considered fighting again. With her track record, it had been the last thing that she wanted. 1 km, Izuku said, holding out the digital meter. This evaluation doesn't just show you how good you are with your quirk, but it also shows how important it is for everyone to know their limit. Knowing your limit is the first logical step in figuring out what kind of hero you will become. Most of the kids didn't seem to be paying attention to his words. Instead, they were looking at her like she was some out-of-this-world being. She rubbed the back of her neck and wished for her orange jacket. Why didn't she bring it with her when she had the chance? There was no way that she was going to be used with people looking at her like they did. She just wanted her face not to be known by anyone. That's amazing, one student said. 1 kilometer? Are you serious? So we are allowed to use our quirks for real? A blonde-haired boy said. I knew the hero course was great. Their teacher didn't smile at the students' words. Instead, he gave them an unimpressed look. It might have been her imagination, but the man had a dark, amused look on his face, as if he was going to have so much fun in spoiling their thoughts. Honestly, the more that man spoke, the more she was reminded of Kakashi-sensei, and that wasn't a good thing in her eyes. She understood why Kakashi-sensei chose to train Sasuke in the Chunin exams, but she didn't understand why he never took the time to train her or Sakura as well. You think it is amazing? All of you are hoping to become professional heroes once your 3 years in this school is done, Izuku said. And all of you think that you are going to have fun and play games. Well, you are wrong. The person with the lowest score across all 8 events will be judged as hopeless and they will be expelled from the program. Naruto clenched her hands into a fist while everyone else gulped at his words. Expelled? Was this true? Or was he going to give them a second chance? She stared into the man's eyes, noticing that his eyes lacked any emotions. He was serious about this. Just like Kakashi-sensei, he planned to expel the person with the lowest scores. Kakashi-sensei had barely given them a second chance when it came to the Genin exam, and if it weren't for the fact that Sasuke used his head and gave her the rice, then they would have failed. Kakashi-sensei claimed to prioritize teamwork and failed every team that didn't work together, but he passed the team that could barely work together. She licked her dried lips and looked up at the sky, where the clouds were loitering around. Kakashi-sensei was wrong to pass them, but there was no way that she was going to let Izuku-sensei fail her. Because she couldn't do well in some physical exercise. She was going to show him that she was more than capable of dealing with whatever he planned to throw them. She was not going to disappoint her middle school teacher or boss. She was not going to let this tell her that she couldn't become a hero, because Naruto was going to be the hero that heard the people. She was going to save everyone. Especially the people who were abandoned by their society. Naruto Uzumaki was a very odd girl, Izuku mused to himself as he stared down at the girl's file. From the moment he had stepped into the classroom, the girl had shown absolutely no emotion in her eyes. Most kids had some form of emotions in their eyes, but this girl's eyes were cold. Yet despite this coldness that she presented herself to be, she hadn't hesitated to take someone to the nurse. She hadn't been afraid to attack the zero-pointer robot and had even explained to the running examines why she was going to destroy the robot. Izuku had agreed to a certain point about the girl's thoughts, but there was one thing about the girl's words that concerned him. It was the idea that a hero needed to sacrifice their life to save the people. It worried him that a girl had the thought of putting her life at risk if it meant that she defeated the villain. What gave the girl the idea that she needed to go that far? He couldn't help but ask himself as Uzumaki whizzed past Todoroki. Didn't she understand how valuable her life was? And also, why was the girl's file nearly blank? The girl hadn't mentioned where she was born, made no mention about her parents or even which elementary school she went to. It was almost like she was trying to hide herself from the world. It was like she was terrified to admit where she came from because no one would go to the level that she did. 1.98 seconds. Izuku blinked his eyes and stared at the blonde-haired girl, who didn't seem to be happy about the score. If anything, her eyes didn't even light up with any emotion. Rubbing his chin, he glanced at the other students, who were all chatting about the improvement they had. Why was this girl so emotionless? What the hell happened for a kid to become this way? He glanced at the file and wished not for the first time that the file wasn't so empty. It would be a breach of privacy if he went to the girl's apartment without her permission. If he wanted to know the girl's problem, then he would need to gain her trust. He needed to gain her trust because something told him that the girl would never come back to this place if she realized that someone entered her apartment. Q&A. Q. Is Naruto from the elemental countries or is she from a hidden village in BNHA universe? And is a child soldier? A. Naruto is still from the elemental countries, but the elemental countries exist in the same universe of BNHA. It will be further explored in the story. Q. Does Naruto have a quirk or is she passing chakra as her quirk? A. Naruto is passing off her chakra as her quirk. Chapter 5A/N. I would like to thank everyone that reviewed the last chapter and added this story to their favorites and follows. I'm sorry for the confusion, but I didn't like the way the original chapter was written. Next day, looking around the cafeteria, Naruto debated about where she could sit. It was only the second day, but it felt like everyone had their groups. Well, everyone but Bakugo and Todoroki. In one corner, she could see Izuku sitting with Uraraka and Itza, but Naruto didn't feel comfortable sitting with them. Yaoyorozu was sitting with Jiro while Ashido sat with Ajui. Kirishima was sitting with Kaminari and that perverted grape boy. There was no doubt in her mind that Kirishima would have no problem letting her sit with them, but Naruto understood her classmate's type. He was the type of kid that made you want to be friends with, and the blonde didn't want to open. It was already bad enough that Isuka didn't mind her coldness, but if she became friends with another person then she was afraid of herself. Shaking her head, Naruto flickered her eyes towards Todoroki, who seemed to be sitting by himself in the corner. Would it be a good idea to take a seat beside him? He didn't seem like the type to ask questions, which was what she wanted. She did not know him, which made it easier for her. Nothing in the world would make her want to sit beside Bakugo, since he had always acted like an asshole. If there was one type of a person that she didn't like, it was a bully. It was with that decision, she made her way to take a seat beside Todoroki. It isn't a problem if I take a seat here, Naruto asked, taking a seat in front of her classmate. The bacalaureate-haired boy looked away from his soba noodles and raised his eyebrow at her. It might be too late for her to ask, but Naruto needed a place to sit. A place to sit with someone who probably wouldn't ask her questions about the past. He didn't seem to be the type to care about anyone. She stirred her noodles before flickering her eyes to her classmate, who kept tilting his head and staring at her. There was something unnerving about his eyes. Maybe it was the coldness, or maybe it was the fact that there was a curiosity in his eyes. She mentally shook her head and kept her eyes fixed on the noodles. There was no need for her to talk to him or even snap at him. If she snapped at him, then it might lead to conversations, and she didn't want to make a conversation with a guy that might be an asshole. Why did you ask to sit beside me if you already made your decision? Naruto looked away from her noodles and stared at her classmate's mismatched eyes. There was no fury in his words. If anything, her classmate had asked that question with detachment, which seemed weird if you asked her. She thought only Sasuke's brother can present himself cold, but her classmate showed no problem that he could act as cold as his quirk. I thought it would be nicer to pretend that I'm polite and that there is an actual possibility that someone is going to sit with you, she said, taking a huge bite of her ramen. Todoroki gave her a blank look, but the blonde could see that his lips were almost twitching at her comment. It was hard to tell if he was holding back a scowl or if he was tempted to laugh at her words. But knowing her luck, it probably was the first. What do you mean, an actual possibility of someone sitting beside me? You think no one wants to sit beside me? Todoroki asked, taking a bite of his soba. The blonde looked at the swirling noodles before looking back at her blank classmate. What could she say? Could she say that he seemed intimating to some of the kids? Could she tell him about how his eyes lacked any warmth? It wasn't any of her business to tell him. Things always seemed to go wrong when she made a small comment to someone, and there was no way she was going to take a chance with this guy. She wanted some form of a peace. You are going to keep quiet about it? He probed. Naruto put down her chopsticks and pointed to the students around them. Do you know the difference between you and the other students? Their eyes are warm and inviting, telling people that they don't mind if you want to get to know them, but your eyes tell people that you don't want that. You barely talk to anyone in the classroom, only when it was necessary, while everyone else tried to make friends with each other. The same could be said for you, Todoroki stated as she slurped on her noodles. You barely interacted with anyone in the class except for those 3 boys, yesterday. It was different for her, Naruto wanted to tell him. She couldn't let anyone get close to her. She didn't want to become friends with someone only for them to betray her. It wasn't like she used to be like this. When she had been a little girl, all she ever did was try to interact with the other kids. She made pranks just so she had their attention. She challenged Sasuke because she thought if she beat him then people would want to be her friend. She tried so hard when it came to making friends that all her efforts were for nothing. It is hard for me to interact with people. She looked at the smiling students and clenched her hands into a small fist as memories of her ex-shinobi days flooded into her mind. I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to become the best hero that I can be. She wasn't going to let anyone in her life. She wasn't going to fall into the delusion that kids would accept the person that she was. She wasn't going to think that the people were going to put her first. There was only one person who seemed to give a shit about her, and she turned down his offer. She turned it down all because she couldn't find it in herself to stay in that part of the world. Why go back to a world that didn't give a shit about her? A world that seemed ready to cage her for something that wasn't completely her fault. Naruto could only stare at her storybook while her classmates whispered excitedly about All Might teaching them. She didn't know what was the excitement about the number one hero teaching them. He was a great hero, that was something she could never deny, but experience taught her that being good in the job didn't always mean being a good teacher. She wasn't going to expect the man to be a great teacher, but there was a small chance that he would be a great one. You know, Uzumaki, we never heard your thought about All Might teaching us. Everyone in the class had given their opinion, even Todoroki and Bakugo, but we hadn't heard what you think. One of her classmates said, drawing everyone's attention to her. Naruto closed her book and stared at her fellow blonde, who had a large smile on his face. Her thought? Did it even matter? No one wanted to know what she thought. In Konoha, people thought that she was just too slow to understand anything. People thought that just because she played pranks and didn't try in school, that it meant she was a terrible student. Why did her classmates want to know? She nibbled her lips before looking at Todoroki and Bakugo, both of whom were now quiet. I don't really give a shit. Naruto leaned against her chair and stared up at the sky. All Might is an amazing hero, but it doesn't mean he is going to be an amazing teacher. The black-haired girl beside her frowned. Why not? He has a lot of experience when it comes to being a hero. Don't you think it might translate well when it comes to teaching? Naruto snorted at her classmate's comment before looking out at the window. Wasn't Kakashi an amazing ninja? Wasn't Jiraiya an amazing ninja? Jiraiya had barely taught her anything, while Kakashi only seemed focused on teamwork and Sasuke. Neither of them have tried to help her when it came to being a better ninja. Hell, her teacher had even ignored the fact that Sakura had sometimes skipped breakfast because she was on a diet. What type of teacher does that? What type of person ignore these kinds of things? She mentally shook her head at her thought. Sometimes a person can be amazing at their job, but when it comes to teaching their job to others, then that is when they suck. Her classmates blinked their eyes at her words, but the blonde-haired girl couldn't bring herself to apologize. She was too tired of expecting people to be good teachers immediately. She had seen enough teachers to know that not everyone could teach. She might be too harsh when it came to telling them about her thoughts, but someone needs to wake them up. Someone had to speak the truth, and she would be that girl. High wouldn't hire someone that can't teach, Itza pointed out. They are supposed to be making us the best heroes that we can be, and learning from the number one hero would give us this opportunity. The blonde raised her eyebrow at her classmate but made no attempt to contradict him. There might be some truth in his words, but life taught her differently. Life taught her that nothing ever went the way you thought it would. People weren't like what you expected. They could be cold and cruel, or they could be more understanding than you gave them credit. People could be good at their job but be bad at teaching their job. Are you okay, Uzumaki? Naruto twisted her head around and blinked her eyes at Todoroki, who had a small frown on his face. Was it obvious that she was feeling bitter? Unlike everyone else here, she had a good control of her emotions. Well, she didn't have much emotions really, but she was good at making it seem like she had none. It became hard for her to put a fake smile, but putting a blank expression was becoming a second nature for her. I'm fine. Todoroki raised his eyebrow but made no comment. He didn't need to say anything because Naruto could see from his eyes that he didn't believe a word that she said. He was wrong to think like that. She was fine. She had been fine the moment she came to this part of the world. She had been fine since Sasuke made it clear that he thought so little of her. She had been fine the moment the council debated about what to do with her. She was perfectly fine. I have come through the door like a normal person. Naruto let out a sigh of relief when most of her classmates had turned their attention to the smiling All Might. Only one person seemed to have his eyes fixed on her, but she wasn't going to let Todoroki know that his question affected her. She was going to stare at their strange teacher and not show that she was fazed by his weird question. The Hero Basic Training is the class that will put all of you through all kind of training in order to make all of you heroes, All Might informed them, pulling something out of his cape. I would go into further detail, but there is no time for me to explain. Instead, I'm going to jump into the first activity, which is battle training. He was going to train them on how to fight? Naruto asked herself as her classmates whispered to each other in excitement. Shouldn't they make them experience it? In Konoha, they were paired up and told to fight each other. They were taught some kata, but then they fought each other. In fact, when she became a genin, Kakashi didn't even taught her any special jutsu or anything. He made them go through that Chuunin exam without any knowledge. It was almost like he wanted to kill them. Of course, for your battle training, you will need your costumes, All Might declared, clicking a button on the wall to reveal a row of selves filled with their seat number. The costumes were made according to both your quirk registry and the special request forms that you filled out before being admitted to the school. Her classmates cheered at his words, but Naruto could only stare blankly at her case number. When they had given her the form to fill, she hadn't really thought of what limit that she wanted them to overcome. She had more chakra than most people in the elemental countries, which meant that she didn't really have it a weakness. The Kyuubi was only a problem when she lost control of her emotions, or that was what she figured out after her fight with Sasuke. She could not allow herself to lose control of the demon inside of her. Todoroki knew from the moment Uzumaki began talking to him that she was different from all the other kids that he observed and interacted with. While everyone else had no problem with answering his questions, his classmate always seemed to hesitate before answering his question. Some people would say it would be because she was thoughtful, but he had seen the emotions in her eyes. It might be small, but he saw the fear in her eyes. The same fear that his mother used to have whenever she thought of talking back to his father. It was from there that he noticed small patterns about his classmate that no one seemed to pick on. If everyone in the class interacted with each other, Uzumaki would avoid any interactions. She would answer questions and elaborate them, but she would never tell someone that she thought they were wrong. He noticed the blonde-haired girl wanted to tell Aitsa that he was wrong, but something stopped her. He didn't know what it was, but he knew his classmate had issues. Should he ask the girl about her issues? If you dare look at my ass or boobs again, I will make sure that you will never be able to have kids again, Uzumaki snarled, snapping him out of his train of thought. Todoroki blinked his eyes when he saw that the blonde-haired girl had pulled the purple-haired boy from the cape, a scowl playing on her lips. Actually, let me explain myself better. If I see you look at any girl's ass or boobs, then I will tear your balls away from your body and feed it to the dogs. Todoroki tilted his head and stared at the girl's costume while most of the boys gulped at the girl's threat. There wasn't anything inappropriate about the girl's costume. It looked almost normal. She was just wearing a sleeveless orange kimono-style blouse, which seemed to be hugging her chest a little bit too tightly, and a pair of dark pants. She even had a pair of black high-heeled boots, although the blonde-haired girl still seemed to look petite. It's time for battle training, All Might said, drawing everyone's attention to him. Todoroki didn't miss the way their teacher's eyes lingered on Uzumaki, who had already knocked out the short boy. He wondered if the man was going to ask Uzumaki about the reason for knocking the boy out, or if he heard the girl's threat. This appears to be the same field used in the entrance exam, Aitsa commented. Are we going to perform cityscape maneuvers? All Might shook his head. We're moving on to step 2, indoor anti-personnel battle training. Todoroki nodded and glanced at his potential opponents. Everyone was strong in their own way, but only Uzumaki seemed to be a problem for them. The girl was the fastest kid in their class and could lift weights as large as 600 kilograms without breaking a sweat. Her quirk allowed her to do so many things, but he couldn't figure out what could be her backlash. At first, he thought her quirk was similar to All Might, but there was something odd about her quirk. It almost reminded him of another hero, but he couldn't remember his name. You mostly see villain battles happening outdoors, but if we are talking statics, the most heinous villains are more likely to conduct crimes indoors. All Might rubbed his chin. The cleverest villains lurk indoors, and they would be doing their work despite being confined and being under house arrest. They would do black market deals and be the masterminds behind the most heinous crimes. Todoroki didn't miss the way Uzumaki stiffened at the mention of black market or how her eyes seemed to lit up with worry before being masked away. He shouldn't care. He wasn't here to make friends, but there was no denying that his classmate was hiding something. There was no denying that his classmate understood all too well what the number one hero was talking about. But how did she know it? I'm going to be splitting all of you into villain teams and hero teams, All Might said. You will be facing off in 2-on-2 indoor battles. Tsuyu frowned. So no basic training. The best way to learn is through experience, Uzumaki answered before All Might could reply to their classmate's question. The blonde-haired girl stared at her hands and then to their classmate. It is one thing to learn in class and it is another thing when it comes to experience. You might do well in a class, but when it comes to actually fighting someone, you will freeze and someone needs to come save you. There was a trace of bitterness and anger in the girl's voice. A bitterness that only someone who had experienced this could feel, and he wondered where his classmate had experienced this. From what he observed, Uzumaki had went to the same middle school as Midoriya and Bakugo. However, he also knew things weren't what it seemed. He knew because some people thought that his father was a good hero, but only his family members knew better. Now let me explain to you about the exercise, All Might said. The villains will be hiding a nuclear weapon in a hideout and the heroes will have to go in and take care of it. Do we pick our teammates or are you going to assign them to us? Uzumaki interrupted. All Might pulled out a hat from his cape. I was getting there, but to answer your question, teammates are determined by drawing lots. Uzumaki frowned but didn't protest against the man's words. Instead, she flickered her vacant eyes at the people around them before nodding her head. He didn't miss the way her eyes seemed to harden when it landed on Bakugo or how her eyes shone with worry when it came to Midoriya. As cold as she displayed herself to be, there was no denying that she did care in her own way. Uzumaki wasn't completely heartless. Of all the people that she had to be paired with, she had to be paired with the one that doesn't know how to work in a team. Naruto might have luck when it came to gambling, but when it came to teammates, she had the worst luck. She could have Kirishima, Todoroki and hell even that pervert would be better than Bakugo. At least, she could team with them and talk reasonably with them, but Bakugo was a whole different ballgame. He never liked listening to people giving them their opinions. Don't get in my way, Whiskers. Naruto stared at the blonde-haired boy and then to Izuku, who seemed to be busy talking to the brown-haired girl. They were going to go against them in 15 minutes and her classmate had no intention of pretending that they would discuss about this. He expected her to just let him do what he wanted, but she couldn't do that. She couldn't let the two of them fight without making sure that he didn't send Izuku to the hospital. Bakugo, when have I ever gave a crap about what you want? He growled at her, but the blonde-haired girl narrowed her eyes at him. Whether you like it or not, we need to work as a team and that means we are going to do this together. Now it was Bakugo's turn to narrow his eyes at her, but the blonde-haired girl couldn't bring herself to pretend to be scared of him. She couldn't bring herself to pretend that she gave a shit about what he wanted to do. It might be her bad luck for her to be paired with him, but it was Izuku's good luck. If her classmate had been paired with anyone else, they would have no idea on how to make the damage smaller, but she knew his type. And what makes you think I'm going to listen to an emotionless bitch like you? Emotionless bitch? She felt her lips twitched at his words. There had been a lot of words to describe her, but this was the first time someone called her an emotionless bitch. She used to call herself the head bitch in charge. She had been called a mini tsunade because of her temper and strength. She had been called ugly and fat, but no one ever called her an emotionless bitch. It should bring her anger, but all she could feel were hints of what must be amusement. She forgot what amusement felt like. Because this emotionless bitch knows that while you have a shitty personality, that you are stronger than some of the kids here, she said, grabbing hold of her classmate. A part of her knew that she should try to stroke his ego to make him listen, but she was no Sakura or Ino. She was Naruto Uzumaki and she was no liar. But you have to admit that you need some improvement. I'm going to murder you. I would like to see you try, she said dryly. Look, if I let you fight Izuku by yourself, then you will be facing some issue since he has always been analyzing your quirk and because you are underestimating him. Now you need me to make sure that you don't let your pride ruin the chance for a good and fair fight. I won't interfere unless I think you are going to take it too far. He opened his mouth to argue, but the blonde-haired girl only tightened her grip on him before placing her hand on his mouth. They could complain about her, but Naruto wasn't an idiot. If she let him go, then there was no telling what he would do. If she let him talk, then there would be stuck here tomorrow. She would rather go to her part-time job without explaining to her boss about why she didn't come in today. Look, if it makes you feel better, then I need you in order to win this stupid battle, she said. Izuku will probably be more focused on you than on me, which means I can capture Okako without a problem. However, the only way we can win is if you try to be a better person than before. I don't have much trust when it comes to anyone, but I'm going to trust you when it comes to Izuku. I'm going to trust that you won't go overboard and harm the one person that seems to give a shit about you. Bakugo stopped struggling and the blonde-haired girl stared blankly at him. You can rip him apart, but I don't want you to forget that while all those heroes were too fucking scared to save you, that Izuku ran to save your sorry ass even though you told him to go kill himself, she hissed. I don't give a shit that you say your friendship with him is over, but just remember that you would have been dead if it weren't for him. I want you to remember that despite every shitty thing you did to him, he was willing to sacrifice his life for you because you were his friend. Not everyone would do that. A person would only do that if they think that person was worth it, or if their bond was strong. Bakugo squinted his eyes at her, but Naruto just let go and turned her body around. She shouldn't tell him these things, but it pissed her off that he took Izuku for granted. It made her angry that he had no idea on how important he was to Izuku. She had been walking back home when she heard the exchange between them. She knew Izuku claimed that his legs moved on their own, but Naruto thought different. Izuku will do anything for Bakugo, just like she would have done anything for Sasuke if it meant that he stayed in the village with their team. She might have lost her team and she didn't know what she was going to do about Sasuke, but right now Naruto would be damned if she allowed Bakugo to take his bond with Izuku for granted. She would be damned if she allowed Izuku to go through that heartache. QNAQ, is this Naruto canon? Yes, in terms of abilities, but her backstory is a bit different when compared to Naruto in canon. Q. Did Naruto choose to leave the village willingly? It is hinted that she chose to leave the village willingly, but the reason for it would be explained in the later chapters. Q. Who is this he that is mentioned? It is one of the Naruto's character that knew that Naruto was leaving, but who it is will be revealed later. Q. What kind of relationship will Aizawa have with Naruto? Naruto and Aizawa will have a parental relationship. Q. Which student did Naruto replace in A1, or are there 21 students in class? There are 21 students in the class. Chapter 6A/N. I am sorry for not updating earlier, but I have been extremely busy for the last couple of months with university. Whiskers was a pain in the ass. Bakugo had long decided that his classmate was annoying, the moment she defended DEKU from him. The blonde-haired girl only seemed to open her mouth whenever he talked to DEKU. Instead of being quiet like she usually was, his fellow blonde would give him a frosty look before defending the younger boy. She couldn't just ignore DEKU and let him do as he pleased. Most of the time, it felt like Whiskers didn't think he was anything special, which was annoying, because his quirk was better than anyone else in their middle school. However, he couldn't deny that Whiskers was smart. The girl had always been in the top 5 when they were in middle school, despite having job in a cafe. Everyone in school had been impressed with their classmate for having accomplished it, and even he could gurglingly admit that Whiskers was a hard worker. It wasn't easy to get good grades when one had to work. Since I'm going to be with you so that you don't have to do anything stupid, we will need to make a trap to stop Midoriya's partner from taking the weapon, Whiskers commented, staring at the nuclear weapon before scanning the room. If I were Midoriya, I would tell my partner to go after the weapon while I attack the asshole who doesn't know how to work in a team. He opened his mouth to argue with her, but the words died down when Whiskers turned those emotionless eyes to him. If there was one thing that made Whiskers weird, it was the fact that her eyes never seemed to hold any emotions. In the 3 years he had known her, not once had those cold eyes ever glinted with emotions. Maybe anger and annoyance, but even then, it was rare. Why the hell do you keep mentioning that? He finally snapped, once he regained his senses. I agreed to listen to whatever plan that you cooked up, didn't I? For someone who claimed we needed to work together, you have a shitty way of making me believe that you actually need my help. The girl inhaled and turned her head to the weapon that stood in front of them. Sorry for not trying to kiss your ass and tell you that you are a good team player, but I know that if I haven't pointed out that Midoriya knew your quirk, then you wouldn't have agreed to work together. Instead, you would have attacked the guy, since you are furious for some shitty reason. Shitty reason? The bastard never told me that he had a quirk? He had been lying to me for years now, he snarled. I have known him since we were little kids and not once had he ever stated that he gained a quirk. You don't just gain a quirk. Well, considering the fact that you abandoned him, I don't blame him for hiding it from you since. Whiskers knitted her eyebrows and then stared at him thoughtfully. You know, you have a point. If he had a quirk for years, then why hadn't he ever mentioned that he gained one? It would have stopped everyone from bullying him. He is also a hero otaku, so it makes no sense for him to hide it. It also makes no sense for him to suddenly gain a quirk. Yeah, because he is quirkless. Something isn't adding up. Whiskers frowned. Aizawa-sensei stated that he had erased his quirk, which makes sense since he didn't throw the ball far the first time. The second time, he threw the ball but he damaged his fingers. I don't know much about quirks, but it is a backlash, isn't it? Whiskers, what are you getting at? No, this isn't the time for us to think about the mystery of Midoriya's quirk. The blonde shook her head. It isn't going to be much help since Midoriya would be too reckless to think of using it. However, if I were to think like Midoriya, then I would be using your bullying experience to fight you. What the hell does that have to do with Midoriya? The whiskered girl raised her eyebrow before staring out at the window. Midoriya isn't the type to miss small details. In fact, anyone that had been physically abused or bullied would know which hand would be raised when someone become angry. In fact, I noticed that whenever you want to beat him up that you would use your right fist against him. He would be expecting you to punch him with your right fist, since he would have instincts when it comes to you. Do you realize how fucking annoying you are? You want me to keep my mouth shut and wait for you to realize that you were an idiot to underestimate his brains. He growled and Whiskers waved her hand. You are an idiot if you think you need bronze when it comes to fights. Sometimes, it is the cunning people that win a fight and not the strongest guy. I'm going to kill you. She raised her eyebrows. You can kill me once we defeat Midoriya and his partner, but until then you are stuck with me as your partner, and as your partner, I'm not going to pretend that everything that you do is amazing. My job is to make sure that we work together as a team, which means that it requires you to swallow your pride and accept my criticism, in order for you to improve your performance. You know, I would think you would want Deku to win. Whiskers pinched her nose. Don't tempt me, but I don't like to lose, which is a good thing for you but a terrible thing for Midoriya. If you get in my way, then I will kill you. If you let your temper get the better of you, then I will end you, she retorted. So let us get this show on the road, because we only have 5 minutes to prepare everything. Perhaps being paired up with Whiskers wasn't the worst thing, but he would rather die than admit it to her. Toshinori looked down at the file in his hand before glancing at the screen, where he could see young Uzumaki and Bakugo making their way towards where Izuku and his partner were. There was something oddly familiar about the girl's name, but he couldn't remember what was familiar about her. Did he know anyone with the name Uzumaki? Although, Uzumaki was quite a common last name when he thought about it. There had been plenty of people with that last name, but the ones that he met had red hair. Although there was that hero, but it would have been known if he had a family member. The media would never let something like this kept quiet. If the girl had been related to a hero, then it would have been known by the media. It probably didn't help that her files had stated clearly that she was an orphan. It was the main reason that she had requested to have a part-time job, as she wanted to make some money to pay for her schooling. Don't you think it is stupid for the both of them to leave the weapon unguarded? Kaminari asked, tilting his head. They can't be that confident that they can win against them. I don't know what Bakugo is like when he fights, but I have seen Uzumaki in the exam. Zero looked at the poker-faced girl in the screen. She was able to beat most of the robots without breaking a sweat, and not only that, but she was helping an injured person in the exam. No matter how good she is, we still have no idea if it translates well in a situation like this, Momo pointed out. We haven't known each other long enough for her to make plans on how to defeat them. They don't know the full extent of their quirks. It is quite reckless for them to leave the weapon alone. But Midoriya, Bakugo, and Uzumaki went to the same middle school, Aitsu reminded them. They must have encountered each other's quirks, which means that they aren't going in there with no knowledge of their abilities. Toshinori could understand all the points that students made, and to a certain extent he agreed with their thoughts on the actions of Bakugo and Uzumaki. However, He also knew that his students had missed certain details about the room. None of them had noticed that the room had its object removed, nor had they noticed that Uzumaki had drawn several characters around the weapon. He didn't know what the characters were supposed to represent, but it was intriguing to see what the girl's quirk could do. Everyone watched closely and tried to learn something from this match. The students nodded their head and looked at the screen, where Midoriya and his partner had climbed through the window. Toshinori glanced at the screen, where Bakugo was charging through the corridor. Where was Uzumaki? He flickered his eyes through the screens and frowned at the lack of partner. Where would the girl go? He frowned when he saw a shadow on the floor. Was it possible that the girl was on the ceiling? He scanned through the girl's file and rubbed his chin when he saw that the girl had filled in her quirk as energy manipulation. There weren't many details about her quirk, but the facts that the girl had written about her quirk were very similar to another person. He thinned his lips and stared at the girl's photo carefully, noticing for the first time that the girl's appearance reminded him of the little boy who went missing 30 years ago. The little boy that was never found. That's low, Bakugo. Kirishima yelled, snapping him out of his thoughts. Sneak attacks are so unmanly. Sneak attacks may be a dirty technique, but it is still a valid strategy, he informed the boy, staring at the furious young man in the screen. He felt his shoulders tensed when he saw that young Midoriya had half of his mask destroyed. It was good that the boy had managed to dodge the attack. A couple of months ago, it would have been impossible for the young boy to do something, but it showed that the training had paid off. Wait a second, isn't that Uzumaki? Another student yelled, pointing to the screen, where Uzumaki stood on the side of the wall with a blank look on her face. How the hell is she able to stand on the walls? I thought her quirk only allowed her to enhance her abilities. Really? I thought Uzumaki's quirk also allowed her to make clones, Shiro said, drawing everyone's attention on him. The young boy rubbed the back of his neck, looking visibly uncomfortable with the attention that he was receiving from everyone. Taking a deep breath, the boy explained himself. I was in the same block as Uzumaki when she was doing the exam, and she was able to send one of the participants to the nurse and finish the exam by using her clones. Uzumaki can make clones. Mineta drooled. There can be 3 copies of that body. Toshinori didn't try to reprimand Tsuyu when she slapped the boy in the head. He may have been a teenage boy once, but it was still disgusting to hear a boy talked about a girl like she was a meal. Shaking his head, Toshinori watched as Bakugo charged after the boy, swinging his right fist. Midoriya must have expected this, because he was already reaching his hand out, but in the last minute, Bakugo switched hands. It seemed like Bakugo's pride wasn't as big as everyone claimed it was, Toshinori mused, as the boy slammed his left fist against Midoriya's face. Toshinori glanced at Uzumaki, who had a strange, far-away look in her eyes. No, the look in her eyes wasn't all that strange. It was a look that only someone who had traumatic experience could have. It was a look that soldiers would have, and it made him wonder if the girl had been dealt with a bad hand. The school would need to consider looking into Uzumaki's past. It seems like Uzumaki also fights dirty, Kaminari said, pointing to the screen, where Uzumaki tackled Okako. She attacked Okako when she was too busy watching Midoriya and Bakugo fight. It is her fault for not paying to her surroundings, Aitsa argued. And while it is wrong for Uzumaki to attack in that way, she is playing the role of the villain, and a villain will take this opportunity to attack the hero. However, I can see why she wouldn't pay attention, because no one would think that 2 villains would leave a weapon unattended. With his partner captured, All Might couldn't help but wonder what his student was going to do to win the match. When Naruto went to middle school for the first time, she had no plans of getting involved with everyone. She had only planned to finish middle school, get a part-time job and live her life in peace. She didn't want to build any bonds because people were always going to betray her. Sasuke betrayed her when he decided to kill her, and Sakura betrayed her when she blamed her for the fact that she couldn't bring him back. Midoriya Izuku was the boy that always made it hard for her to forget the promise she made to herself. He was the boy who got bullied because of his lack of quirk. He was the boy that was being bullied by the one person that he looked up to, and Naruto couldn't help but protect him. He reminded her of the old Naruto in that way, and maybe that was why she couldn't ignore him. It was for this reason that she tied Okako up and taped her mouth, because Naruto didn't want anyone to ruin this fight. She wanted to see how strong Midoriya had become in the past year, and the reason for his growth. She wanted to see if there was an explanation for how strong he became, because what Bakugo had said to her made sense. Until a year ago, their classmate had no quirk. He was a weak little boy that dreamt big, and now he was no longer that boy. He was a boy with a strong quirk, which made no sense. Naruto watched as the two boys threw punches that could seriously injure them. Half of her classmate's mask was destroyed, revealing his curls, and the rest of his costume was shredded and scuffed from Bakugo's explosions. There were several scratches on her classmate's cheeks, and it was clear that both of the boys were dripping with sweat. She could see that the two of them were exhausted, but this wasn't the time for her to do her thing. Despite their injuries, neither of them seemed ready to give up. Yes, Midoriya was injured and Bakugo was slowly becoming tired from the fight. Although, Naruto wondered if he was tired from having his beliefs being torn apart or if he was mentally exhausted. His crimson eyes were becoming more and more chaotic, and Naruto wondered if maybe it was a bad idea to let them continue this. Memories of her battle with Sasuke flooded in her mind, but Naruto pushed it back, not willing to let her past take control of her again. This was not the time to have a breakdown. That's enough, Bakugo. Her partner twitched and Naruto felt her breath hitched when he turned his eyes to look at her. It wasn't the craziness in his eyes that worried her, it was the fact that he had that depraved smirk on his face. The smirk that he always made when she demanded for him to stop bullying Midoriya. The smirk that said he didn't give a fuck about what she said. It was the smirk that she hated the most. Fuck you, Whiskers. You really shouldn't have said that, Bakugo, she whispered, taking out the second capture tape. Bakugo blinked his eyes and slipped his hands into his pocket, before turning an accusing eye at her. Did he really believe that she would have allowed him to do what he want? She was a lot of things, but she wasn't an idiot. When they were making their way to the floor, she had managed to slip her hand through his pockets and grabbed the tape. She would never make the same mistake again. Don't you dare, Whiskers. Fuck you, Bakugo. Naruto snarled, ducking Bakugo's punch, before grabbing hold of Frozen Izuku. She sighed and tied Midoriya up, before flickering her eyes at her furious classmate. She should have allowed them to continue the fight, but at this rate, they were going to get hurt. There was no chance in hell that she was going to endanger people, just because Bakugo had an ego. She wasn't going to let Midoriya be Bakugo's punching bag when he was at this state. I told you not to get in my way. She twisted her head and glared at the furious boy. Since when the hell did I ever listen to you? I told you that I will interfere if I thought that you were taking things too far, and you hurting Midoriya when he was badly injured was it. Why the hell do you want to become a hero? Heroes don't hurt people when they are down. Heroes are supposed to be understanding, not be some asshole who can't handle the fact that his classmate had a quirk. You don't. I don't know a thing, that is what you are going to say, right? Bakugo froze and the blonde-haired girl forced herself to smile at him. Do you know how many times I have to hear that? Do you know how many times I was forced to be a punching bag because the asshole, who I called my best friend, couldn't accept the fact that I was catching up to him? What you were doing to him reminded me of that asshole, and I don't want Midoriya to end up like me. So call me a bitch, tell me that I don't understand a thing but understand that I'm an emotionless bitch because of people like you. She turned away from everyone and walked off, ignoring All Might as he declared that they won. They may have won the match, but Naruto didn't like the fact that she hadn't been able to get Bakugo to see the reality of everything. She should have gone back to class, but Naruto didn't have the energy to deal with everyone. She just wanted some time to herself, wanted to come to grips with everything before going to her classroom. How long must this haunt her? How long must the asshole hurt her? She shouldn't be a hero. She shouldn't have joined the school when her mentality was like this, but the thought of disappointing her teacher had been too much for her. She looked at the mirror, stared at her disgusting whisker marks and then to her hands. What the hell was I thinking? She couldn't help but ask herself. Heroes should be able to save everyone and keep their promises. Heroes are supposed to be brave, but I'm the coward that ran away from home, because she didn't want to face punishment. I couldn't even stop that idiot Bakugo from going too far. I can't even stop my friends from getting hurt. Midoriya's scratched face flooded into her mind along with the friends that she couldn't protect. Midoriya getting badly hurt was on her shoulders because she didn't make Bakugo guard the weapon. Hinata had gotten hurt because she encouraged her to fight Neji, even though it was clear to everyone that he wanted to murder her. Hell, even Sasuke's Hiki was her fault. If she hadn't taunted him then none of this would have happened. She should have avoided people, and continue things like she originally planned. You are an idiot if you think that you were meant to live a boring life. Why the hell was that fox talking to her? It was his fault that she came here. It was his fault that she lost control during the match with Sasuke. If he hadn't taken advantage of her emotional state then none of this would have happened. If it weren't for him then she could continue pretending that everyone would have accepted her. She clenched her hands into a fist and stared at the mirror, wishing not for the first time that the Hokage had given this demon to someone else. Why her? Why did he pick the child that had no one who could protect her? He could have chosen someone who had parents that could love them. Why the orphan girl? What the hell did she do wrong for him to pick her? She slapped her cheeks and shook her head. She shouldn't wish this burden on someone else. It was wrong too, but sometimes she just wondered what the hell did she do wrong for the man to pick her. Splashing some water on her face, Naruto went out of the bathroom and made her way back to the classroom. She took several deep breaths, forcing down the tornado of emotions that were ready to consume her. There was no time for her to let the past consume her. She had a future that she needed to focus on, a future that she wanted to prove her teacher right. Are you alright, Uzumaki? Naruto blinked her eyes and stared at her teacher, who looked at her with eyes shining with concern. Why were teachers in this part of the world more caring? When had a teacher, in Konoha, asked her if she was fine? Iruka-sensei had cared for her but he had ignored her silent cries of help. Kakashi-sensei had never noticed the fact that she had problems. Perhaps, the only other person that cared for her had been Jiraiya. She shouldn't think of the perverted Sunin. I'm fine, All Might Sensei. Naruto lied but she could tell from her teacher's eyes that he didn't believe the bullshit that was coming out of her mouth. In all honesty, she also didn't believe a word that she was saying. Her teacher nodded and the blonde-haired girl took her place, next to Todoroki, who had a strange look in his eyes as he stared at her. She glanced at Bakugo, who had a scowl on his face, and then scanned the room for Midoriya. There was no sign of Midoriya. Midoriya went to the nurse, Todoroki said, drawing her attention to him. She blinked her eyes and opened her mouth to question him but the boy shook his head. It is clear that you are worried about him. Thank you for telling me this, Naruto said, turning her head to the screen. Who is next? All Might Sensei hadn't announced it yet, Todoroki replied. He frowned and looked at her carefully, eyes lingering at her own blue eyes and the blonde wondered if there was something that she was supposed to know. He shook his head before changing the subject. You did well in the stimulation, but I didn't realize that your quirk allowed you to stick to walls. I thought your quirk only allows you to enhance your abilities. Naruto shrugged her shoulders. My quirk allows me to do many things and enhancing my physical abilities is just one of them. I didn't really have a chance to use it when we were doing Aizawa-sensei's test. You were foolish to leave the weapon unattended, Todoroki commented, fixing his cold eyes on her. The blonde-haired girl blinked and felt her lips twitched at his words. To everyone, it might have seemed like she left the weapon unattended but she had left some of her clones in the room. It had been her backup plan to let the clones ambush Okako, if she hadn't been able to contain the girl or if Midoriya had split up from her partner. Of course, she would never tell anyone about her plan. I couldn't exactly leave Bakugo by himself. Naruto looked up at the ceiling. If I had left him to deal with Midoriya by himself then we would have situation where everyone would have gotten hurt. It also doesn't help that I wanted to make sure that Midoriya didn't get badly hurt since Bakugo wanted to beat the guy up. The circumstance does make it difficult, Todoroki agreed. But I never realized that Bakugo was subtler than he portrayed himself. Naruto felt her lips twitched at her classmate's comment. He might be a raging asshole, but I won't deny that he shines in battle or that he is smart. She looked at the blonde-haired boy, who stood in the corner with his head dipped low enough to cover his eyes. Naruto thinned her lips and turned her head away. It was clear that he wasn't happy with the way she interfered or the way they won, but she would rather that those two had their fight when she was certain that Midoriya wasn't going to get his ass handed to him. It must be frustrating for him that their fight had been interrupted, but if he was anything like her or Sasuke then he would find a way to finish his fight with Midoriya. Since everyone is back in the room then it is time for me to announce the next battle, All Might declared, his laughter snapping her out of her thoughts. With that said, The next battle is between Shoji Mizo and Todoroki Shoto from Team B versus Ajiro Mashirao and Hagakure Toru from Team I. Please proceed to the next location. Naruto stared at Todoroki and the boy stared back at her. It was startling to see how his eyes rang with boredom and how he could have two different eye color. For a brief second, she contemplated to ask him if there was a reason that he was suppressing his emotions but thought better of it. Asking him about his repression would open up to him asking her why she lacked emotions, and Naruto wasn't ready to reach that stage. It was still one step of a time for her. I will see you soon, Todoroki-san, Naruto said, looking away from his eyes. Todoroki nodded but the blonde-haired girl didn't miss the way that his lips twitched upwards. For a brief second, she recalled of the time when she called Itachi Sasuke's brother and not his name. His lips had also twitched in that way, before he called her the girl that frustrated his brother. She remembered how she blushed at his words, and remembered that she thought he was cute. Now that she thought about it, Itachi had never treated her like a monster. He always treated her with patience and kindness, which was quite the opposite of Sasuke. He had been gentle and the blonde wondered how he could kill his family, if he could act so gentle and loving to his brother. Something wasn't adding up. Mind telling me what is bothering you, kiddo? Naruto looked away from the plates and stared at her boss, who had her arms folded against her chest as she gave her a thoughtful look. For a moment, she debated about lying to the woman but she spent most of her time lying about things. Yet if she talked to her about Sasuke's past then the woman would look at her as if she was crazy. No one would ever believe a 14-year-old boy would murder his whole clan, but there was something about the past that wasn't making sense. This would have never bothered her, if she hadn't realized that Todoroki reminded her of Itachi. I was reading a story book, where the main character's best friend started talking about his past, Naruto lied, putting down the plates and turning her body to look at her. Boss. The best friend said that his brother murdered his whole family because he wanted power and that he left him alive, so that he could test himself against him. I don't really understand that bit, because the main character remembered the brother as being someone kind and gentle. Someone who loved his family and so it makes no sense for this character to end up that way. What kind of fucked up book are you reading? Naruto laughed nervously, but her boss shook her head. Sorry, but who would make a child murder their whole family? I know it makes for a good plot but the character would be so fucked up. She sighed. Then again, there is a lot of fuck up things in this world, but to answer your question, I would tell you that you are right to question everything. I am. Her boss nodded. There must be more to the story than what the best friend had told the main character, Naruto, because there is no way that a brother, who is gentle and kind, could do this, not unless there was a motive. He said the motive was power, Naruto pointed out. Is it? Or is it something else entirely? Wouldn't it be an easy thing to say? If he want power then why leave the little brother alone? The little brother would get in his way unless he want the brother to kill him. Her boss rubbed her chin. I mean, wouldn't it make more sense if the boy was trying to protect his brother? Maybe the older brother was abused and he didn't want his younger brother to go through the same abuse, which was why he killed his family. Maybe he was paid big money to do it. People would do anything for money. However, I really doubt that a gentle boy, who doesn't seem like a psychopath, to kill his family for power. So, you think that there is more to the story? If I were to read the story then I can probably cook up several theories, her boss declared. I used to make up crazy theories about All Might's quirk and the relationships between every hero. God, I remembered when I made up that theory that All Might's quirk wasn't just super strength but maybe something. Naruto ignored her boss as she babbled about the many theories that she had. Was her boss right? Was there a chance that there was more to the story than what Sasuke and everyone else knew? Was it possible that there was more than one person that she could blame for the down spiral of Sasuke's life? She glanced at her school bag, tempted to write a letter to Jiraiya if he could look it up, but then decided against. Chapter 4a/n. I would like to thank everyone that added this story to their favorite